Welcome. Welcome to the House of I.D.E.A, Blueprint for a Special Education Program. This is an archived webinar provided with partial funding of the Minnesota Department of Education. My name is Carolyn Anderson. I'm an advocate at Pacer Center and the parent of two adult children with disabilities. So, what's an analogy? It's a comparison of different, but in some ways parallel things. This webinar uses a comparison of the concept of building a new home with building a special education program. While no analogy is perfect, hopefully this analogy or comparison will help you understand the internal consistency of the special education process. When parents understand the process, they are more able to work with the school to develop an appropriate education program to improve outcomes for their child with a disability.
Carolyn, please explain a little bit more about internal consistency.
It's a process where one step logically leads to the next, and then the process can cycle or begin again. And I'll be talking a lot more about internal consistency as we go along. Imagine you're an architect. You have a client who will be moving to a new area where all the houses are built by the government. There's a huge variety of housing opportunities, and you're going to help your client have a suitable house to meet his needs. You are new to this area, and although you have architect skills, you need to be familiar with the rules in this particular housing development. The government contractors already know these rules for the most part. You need to know them too, or at least know how to ask appropriate questions. You have full authorization from the owner to build this house, so you and the government contractors will work on a plan and put that plan in writing. You will sign it. You will get progress reports as the building progresses. You will get together to reassess the plan at least once a year, because it's going to take a long time to build this house. You will meet more frequently if progress doesn't go as expected or problems crop up. It's better for everyone if you and the contractors get along and all follow the rules. Above all, the client will benefit, and soon the client will take over your job. So you will be teaching the client as you work with the contractors. So that's kind of the house, building the house part of the analogy. But now let's compare this to special education. Who is the owner of this special education program? In this analogy, the owner is the student. But the owner is too young to assume all of the responsibility, so he or she makes use of an architect, in this case the parents, until he or she can fully assume the responsibility. Just as architects plan and dream and propose, we parents see the future for our children. Architects work with contractors to do the actual work. Similarly, parents work with school personnel to educate the child. The general contractor in our analogy is the special education district representative. In our analogy, the house is an effective special education program. The contract or the blueprint would be the IEP, the Individualized Education Program, or your district might call it a triple IP, an individual interagency intervention plan, or if you have a young child, it would be called an interagency family service plan. And these are kind of your blueprints. It's kind of your contract, also because you do give consent and you will receive prior written notice, and these are things I'm going to talk more about. Just as if you're building a house, there are building codes, and similarly in special education there are rules. This might be in the federal law, which is called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and in Minnesota we also have statutes and rules, and there are local school district policies. The location, you notice that when I was talking about the house, it had a location. There was a housing development. Well, the House of Special Education also has a location, and in this case it's called the least restrictive environment, and I'll be talking about that. In this presentation, we will look at these concepts in more detail. As you listen, you may have questions or need more detail on a particular topic. You may want to jot down your questions. You can call or email Pacer to discuss your questions in more detail. Contact information is available on the last slide. So the goal of this workshop is to help parents understand the internal consistency of the IEP process. For example, if you're planning for the sleeping needs of your family as you build a new home, you might first consider how many bedrooms do you need. Notice on the slide that the first thing is to identify needs. Then how big do they have to be? Can you qualify for a loan to build a house with that many bedrooms? Once you've determined your needs and what you qualify for, how much money you can get a loan for, the architect and contractors will work from a blueprint, which will give the size, location, closets, number of electrical outlets, windows, flooring material, so forth. Your contractor will have to organize people to do the work, carpenters, electricians, carpet layers, as well as the materials, lumber, windows, outlet covers, carpeting, to do the job. A government building inspector, as well as the architect and contractor, and of course the owner, will watch the progress and quickly address any problems as they occur until finally the house is built. And as you can kind of see, that follows identifying needs, evaluating the needs, determining the eligibility, in this case it was for a loan, developing the blueprint, watching the progress, revising it as needed, and eventually the house is built. Similarly, in special education, there's an internal consistency. We identify needs, we evaluate the needs of the child, we see if the child is eligible for special education services. For an eligible child, an IEP is developed, then the IEP is implemented, and we watch for progress. We revise and update the IEP, and eventually special education is ended. Let's walk through an example. Say my child is not learning to read, so that's the need. So the teacher and parent request a special education evaluation, so evaluate the needs. My child does meet the state criteria for a specific learning disability, that would be the eligibility. So then the IEP team meets to develop an educational program, that's the IEP, to help my child learn to read. Then we watch the progress, meaning the reports, grades, test scores, to see if he's learning to read. We revise the IEP so my child learns to read with appropriate skills, and eventually the child will end special education.
Carolyn, why do we do all this?
Good question. I hope that you'll always remember the purpose. In our building analogy, the goal is a well-constructed home that will meet the needs of your family for many years. In special education, I.D.E.A., the federal law, says the purpose of special education is to prepare children to lead productive and independent adult lives to the maximum extent possible. So let's begin building. Both building a new home and educating a child with a disability takes a big investment of time, energy, and resources. Both are very valuable and worth the investment. Right now, you are investing your time and energy to learn from this webinar. This investment may be the most important thing you do in your life. Though it may not be easy, important things often are not easy. At PACER, we often see parents think the school will take care of education, that the school will tell us what we need to know and do. But does a contractor tell the architect what to do? No, they work together. Parents are partners with a huge investment. We need to step up to the plate and take up our responsibilities to be informed consumers of special education services. Learn your parent rights and responsibilities. Parents are a child's best advocates. Use PACER and other groups as resources to learn and educate yourself. We parents need to find out about special education, the federal laws, regular education. What does free appropriate public education mean? What are our parent rights and responsibilities? What should our students be doing? How can you find out more? PACER, the Minnesota Department of Education, the I.D.E.A website. These are all ways to find out more information. You'll also want to educate yourself about your child's disability through disability groups or the web, as well as medical providers. While parents do need a working knowledge of their rights and responsibilities, There are organizations like PACER with free services, such as this webinar, for families to help gain this knowledge and answer questions with more detailed information when necessary. If you're building a new home, you will ask, what are the building codes? What laws must I and my builders follow? How can I find out about those laws and codes? Are there house building classes I could take? Similarly, there are building codes in special education. At the federal level, there is I.D.E.A, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, with its procedural safeguards, as well as the law No Child Left Behind, and also Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. At the state level, Minnesota has statutes and rules. At the local level, while there are no additional rules, there are policies for implementing the state and federal laws. An additional consideration is that there are different types of schools and enrollment options. There are public schools, charter schools, private schools. Be aware that rights and responsibilities differ at different types of schools. Also be aware that in Minnesota, all charter schools are public schools, so everything covered in this workshop applies to charter schools as well as other schools. There are some different considerations for private schools, however, and in this case you might want to contact PACER for more information. As stated earlier, the process begins with the recognition of needs. Why do you need a new home? Do you need more bedrooms? You want to live in a different neighborhood? Do you know where to go for more information? Similarly, the process of special education begins with someone. It might be a doctor, a parent, a teacher, a daycare provider who asks questions and recognizes that there may be a need for specialized educational services. In special education, the next step is evaluation. The request for an evaluation should be in writing and be brief. All important business is transacted in writing. In your letter, you can outline the possible areas of need, which might be speech, language, emotional or social functioning, aptitude or intelligence, academic achievement, sensory function, vocational interests and ability, motor skills, and/or functional skills. Notice that the foundation of this process is based on identifying needs through evaluation. It is not immediately moving to solutions. If you look again at the earlier slide on the building process, my child isn't learning to read, so the teacher and parent request an evaluation. The child is eligible under the criteria for specific learning disability. The team meets to develop the program to help the child learn to read. We look at progress reports, grades, and so forth to see if he's learning to read. And if not, the team revises the IEP so the child learns to read. So many times a parent will call us at PACER and say, my child needs a reading specialist. That's putting the cart before the horse, or the roof on the house before you've built the basement. First, we must build a foundation for possible services. This is done through evaluation. When building a new home, you think about your family's needs. How many bedrooms do you need? How many bathrooms? Do you need a room for hobbies? For family get-togethers? Will it be a walkout? How many levels? Do you need to take a community ed class on home building? You evaluate what you need. Similarly, what are your child's needs? Evaluation will determine if a child is eligible and also will determine the educational needs of the child. Evaluation builds the foundation of an eligible child's education program. Parents and school staff will work together to plan an evaluation of all possible areas of need. You will include consideration of special factors, including assistive technology and behavior. There are basically three kinds of evaluation. The first is initial. Does the child have a disability? Is the child eligible for special education? How does the disability affect the child's education? This determines present level of performance and educational needs. We find out what are the needs if the child is eligible. This initial evaluation requires parent consent. The initial services, if the child is eligible, will also require parent consent. The second kind is reevaluation. This must happen at the maximum of every 3 years unless the team agrees otherwise. We advise at PACER never to pass up this opportunity, although in some areas maybe a review of records will give enough information. The purpose of reevaluation is to find out if the child continues to have a disability and determine the present levels of performance and educational needs, and also find out if they continue to be eligible and what their appropriate services might be. The third type of evaluation is called an independent education evaluation. There are really two kinds of those. The first is at private expense. Parents can do this at any time. You might take your child to the Mayo Clinic or the University of Minnesota and get information. If you share these results with the school must consider the results if the school criteria for evaluation is met. So this means they must consider the results and consider the recommendations, but they do not necessarily have to follow them. The second type of independent educational evaluation is at public expense. This happens if the parents don't agree with an initial evaluation or a reevaluation done by the school. The parents can request this if they disagree with the evaluation once per evaluation. If the school says yes when the parent requests the independent evaluation, it will be at no cost to the parents and meet the school criteria for evaluation. And the school and the parents will agree where this evaluation will take place. If the school says no to the parent request to an independent educational evaluation, the school must begin a due process hearing to prove that their evaluation is correct. And at PACER, we don't see this happen very often. In general, all evaluators must be qualified, licensed, and understand the disability of the child. Methods must be appropriate tools, and most must be standardized for the child's disability. The timeline is quite specific. There are 30 school days from the time that the parent signs the permission to evaluate between the time of the signature and the parents receiving the evaluation summary report. At PACER, we find that many parents don't realize the importance of the evaluation report. When I read records for a family, I take a highlighter and I highlight every place in the evaluation that it says there's an educational need for a child. One of the tools that we have at PACER is called the Parent Homework Sheet. Later I'm going to talk about our book called Working Together, and in that book we have a copy of the Parent Homework Sheet. You can also request it by calling PACER Center.
Carolyn, what do we do with the evaluation results?
When you plan to build a house, you analyze your needs. You need to see if you qualify for a loan and mortgage once you've analyzed your needs. Similarly, in special education, there are guidelines for eligibility. School and parents look at the results of the evaluation and compare those results with the state's eligibility criteria. The federal government defines 13 categories for disability eligibility, while each state defines what it takes to be eligible under that category. Once you've analyzed the needs your house will fulfill and you're eligible for a loan, you can start the actual building process. One of the first questions may be, who will you work with? Similarly, parents work with a team to develop services to meet their child's needs. So let's look at the team. First, we've got the architect, the dreamer, the planner. In my analogy, this is the parents. I see the future for my child. The owner is the student with a disability. This is their life. And begin as young as possible to involve your child, even if it's just for part of a meeting. The government contractors, in this case, it would be the special education teacher of the child and a regular education teacher of the child if the child is in any regular ed or will be within the coming IEP year. In our analogy, the general contractor is the authorized district representative. This is a person who knows the resources of the school district and has the authority to allocate those resources. These are the required members of the IEP team. The basic two decision makers are the parents and the district representative. You might also have others, include others on the team who have expertise, people we need to build an appropriate IEP. For example, the school may determine that the team needs a speech therapist. Parents may determine that they'd like to include a family member or daycare provider. Each side, quote unquote, will share with the other who has been invited.
Carolyn, what if my son's teacher can't come?
There is a rule for excusals. A team member may be excused from attendance for all or part of a meeting if his or her area of curriculum or related services is not being modified or discussed, and the parent and school agree in writing that the member need not attend, or if the area is being modified and A, the team member provides written input into the development of the IEP prior to the meeting, and B, the parent and school agree in writing that the member may be excused. PACER advises caution when agreeing to excuse an important IEP team member, as each member has very many things to contribute to the meeting. When you build a house, a blueprint will be drawn up. The plan will include the needed number of bedrooms, the plumbing and wiring diagrams, the layout of the foundation, so that your structure will be sound and functional. In this case, you're on a tight budget, so your house will meet your needs but not be more spacious or ornate than is necessary. It will not be the best house. You can dream about the house you'd like, but few of us can afford it. We focus on what we really need. Similarly, in special education, the IEP team will use the evaluation and eligibility, the foundation, to develop an IEP to appropriately meet the needs of the child. Then services will be developed that need to be appropriate, but here again they will not be quote-unquote the best. The services will be documented in terms of goals to be met, the amount and location of services to instruct the child in those goals, and any support like related services, accommodations, modifications, extended school year needed to meet the goals. Then there's the progress reporting. As these services are provided, the team will watch the progress, both in regular ed and special education. So when you get a progress report, ask yourself, at this rate of progress, will my child accomplish this goal in one IEP year? Look at report cards and state and district test results as well. Then, if progress occurs as expected, the IEP continues. If not, the team must meet to revise the IEP. So the IEP basically delineates the free appropriate public education that will be provided for your child. The acronym for this is FAPE, F-A-P-E, and it means that your child is making meaningful educational progress. So you noticed I said that neither your house nor this blueprint for education is the best. However, it must guarantee that your child will make meaningful educational progress. This was just a brief overview of the process, and now we'll look at a few of these components in more depth and then an example. Here I want to point out a resource. If you have a copy of this, be sure to look over the parts that I'm going to be highlighting. If not, this book is free from PACER Center. You may call or email. The contact information is on the last slide, and you may request free a copy of Minnesota's Guide for Parents to the a Guide for Minnesota Parents to the Individualized Educational Program. In this book, it talks about the IEP. It gives the state recommended form for the IEP, the Individualized Education Program, but also gives all the required components. So even though most districts do not use the form that is recommended by the Department of Education, all the components that we talk about must be in your district's form. Sometimes it's called the Individualized Family Service Plan, the IFSP for small children, primarily 0 to 3, or the the Individualized Interagency Intervention Plan, which is pronounced triple IEP. But again, all the components need to be in these documents. The core of the program is the goals. And what is a goal? In a nutshell, it tells where the child is at now, where they're going, what direction, what do we want him to learn, and how will we know he gets there. Then these goals are supported by related services. Does your child need anything specific to accomplish a goal, such as transportation, parent counseling, or audiological services? Does your child need any accommodations to give him access to regular or special education, or positive behavior interventions and support, or some kind of assistive technology? There's also modifications for some children. Does your child require any modification to enable him or her to learn? Modifications change expectations. There might be less questions or fewer concepts to learn. Then there's also service time and setting. Ask yourself, this is an internally consistent document. Ask yourself, with this time commitment, is it reasonable to assume your child can accomplish these goals in one IEP year? At one point I was looking at an IEP for a child, and this child had 3 goals on the IEP, all to do with behavior. But when I looked at the service time and setting, there was only 20 minutes a week of service time set aside for these 3 goals. So in asking the question, is it logical to assume that with this time commitment, this child can accomplish these 3 goals in one IEP year? And in this case, the answer was no, and so the school and parents worked together to increase the service time so that the child did have a reasonable opportunity to make progress on these behavior goals. So let's highlight the goals again. The goal in a nutshell is, where is the child now, where is he going, and how will we know he gets there? Again, the service time, so we have the measurable goals. And we know what they're starting. I'm going to give an example in a minute. We know where they're starting at a particular skill or behavior, where we want them to go in one IEP year, and how will we know to get there. So we have the service time and setting. Again, with this time commitment, is it reasonable to assume that your child will accomplish these goals in one IEP year? And again, the related service that might support to meet those needs. So here's an example. The parent and educators notice that the child is not learning how to write and draw as expected. So there's the need. So the evaluation shows a need for fine motor skill development. So the IEP has a measurable goal, which will give his current level of his fine motor skill development, the projected ending level for his motor skills, and a method of measuring these motor skills. So the service section of the IEP would state the amount of service committed to achieve this goal in one IEP year. Then there might also be some support necessary to achieve the goal. So if the current lack of fine motor skills prevents the student from participating with his peers, there might be an accommodation. In this case, the accommodation may be assistive technology or a related service such as giving dictation or having a note taker. Then progress reporting. That section of the IEP tells the parents how often and by what method progress will be reported on this and other goals. If a child makes expected progress, the IEP and goal continues.
Carolyn, what if it looks like my child is not making the expected progress?
If your child doesn't make expected progress, and you can tell this from the skills that you see at home, but also be sure to look at the progress reports that the school will be giving you on this and other goals. If it looks like the child is not making progress, then the team has to meet to revise the IEP, and I'll give more detail about that in a minute. So the IEP is the written plan for providing FAPE, a free, appropriate public education. There are a couple of other IEP components to highlight on the next couple of slides. The first of these is least restrictive environment. The law does not permit discrimination in neighborhoods. There's no neighborhood of houses for people with disabilities, although there are group homes to meet the needs of certain individuals who need that environment. So this concept is location. Similarly, your child's house of special education will be in the neighborhood, quote unquote, of regular education. This is called least restrictive environment, or LRE. When your child qualifies for services, the team must make the education happen with children without disabilities to the greatest extent appropriate for your child. This is individually determined. For example, for some students who are deaf, the least restrictive environment is the state school for the deaf, where they can communicate with all staff and students. Although all of the students have disabilities in this setting, it's still the least restrictive environment for some students. School districts must have or provide, quote, a continuum of placement options, unquote, so that the needs of all children with disabilities can be met. The appropriate placement is one where the needs of the child are met. The goal is that this placement will include as many children who do not have disabilities as is appropriate for your child. Another concept is accountability. Owners and architects watch the progress being made by building contractors and workers. As long as progress is being made as expected and the results are satisfactory, the building continues. If the architect notices that something is not according to plan, he or she will meet with the builders to rectify the situation. Or the builders may run into a problem. They might find a rock where they expected to be able to dig a hole for a footing, or the fuses keep blowing out unexpectedly. Together, they'll look at the problem and find a solution. Similarly, in education, the goal is to allow the child to make meaningful educational progress both in regular education and in special education. This is FAPE, a free appropriate public education. We plan for progress, but sometimes things don't work out and go according to plan. More evaluation, such as a functional behavior assessment, might be needed. More or different services might be needed. Remember to ask yourself this question: at this rate of progress, will my child accomplish this goal in one IEP year? And is my child also making progress in the general curriculum as much as his potential allows? Look at report cards and progress reports from state and district testing. Remember the previous slide. The goal of I.D.E.A., the federal law, is to help children be prepared to lead productive and independent lives to the maximum extent possible. Our nation, state, and local government want our houses and neighborhoods to be of high quality. We want safe neighborhoods, good schools, houses that last. To accomplish this, government entities pass laws and building codes. Cities employ inspectors to make sure that codes are followed. Houses must meet certain standards. Cities often also have truth in housing laws. Federal civil right laws do not permit the taking of property without due process, nor do they permit discrimination. Similarly, education is considered to be a civil right by federal law. Special education services cannot be taken away without due process. Levels of government have laws and rules, and they also employ persons to enforce them. One such federal law is No Child Left Behind. States are required to measure educational outcomes for all children, including children with disabilities, and report them to the public. This is done through standardized tests such as the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments. There is an expectation that all students will have an opportunity to meet academic standards. The Minnesota Department of Education monitors school districts periodically to make sure that federal and state rules are being followed. They also investigate when there is an I.D.E.A complaint, and I'll be talking about filing a complaint on a slide in a few minutes. I want to highlight two more areas: behavior on this slide and transition on the next one. Not all houses are built on level lots. Most lots have some slope, even steep grades. Special planning is needed to adapt the house to its lot. Similarly, some children have specific areas of need that require further planning. Earlier I mentioned special considerations, and one of these is behavior. The IEP team must ask, does the behavior of this child impede the child's learning or that of other children? If so, the team must consider implementing positive behavior interventions and strategies to address the behavior. Remember, the process always starts with building a foundation. This is done through evaluation. In this case, it's called a functional behavior assessment. Evaluators will look at the behavior, what seems to be causing it, why the child engages in this behavior, and what may be done to improve the behavior. A functional behavior assessment should lead to effective positive behavior interventions. This is a proactive plan, which means that the interventions will take place before the behavior occurs. Some students also require a crisis plan. A crisis plan is a reactive plan that outlines what will happen to the child who violates a school rule and endangers himself, herself, or others. The IEP team should discuss the school discipline policies to determine an appropriate response that fits the child and the nature of his or her disability. A plan based on your child's needs provides an appropriate consequence, even in a crisis.
Carolyn, are students who have disabilities exempt from being disciplined?
No, students with disabilities are not exempt from discipline. However, the team must take the student's disability into account when looking at the school's discipline policies to make sure that the student is not discriminated against due to the disability. It's the accommodation section of an IEP which would typically contain the positive behavior plan or a crisis plan. Another area requiring special education planning is transition. Remember who the owner of our house is? Of course, it's the student. It's his or her life we're talking about. Children grow up and most will take charge of their own lives to a greater or lesser extent. They remodel, whether we parents like it or not. PACER strongly recommends that students be included in IEP team meetings and or planning beginning as young as possible. In Minnesota, at least by the 9th grade, the IEP will consider the transition needs of the student. The student must be invited to all IEP meetings, although they are not required to attend. And again, this process begins with building the foundation through evaluation. The student's interests and aptitudes or skills must be taken into consideration. The areas to be assessed are on the slide. When the needs are identified, they will be included on the IEP in goals, accommodations, and services. Transfer of rights happens at age 18 in Minnesota. At this time, all rights transfer to the student from the parent unless a guardian has been named. The parent retains the right to receive special education notices and see the student's school records. The student may continue to invite the parent to IEP meetings.
Carolyn, it seems like the owner is taking over for the architect.
Exactly right. When building a house, there is a legal contract. The owner, architect, and contractors draw up a plan, the owner signs it, and the house begins to be built. If differences arise while building the house, the contract will be used to verify what was agreed upon. Similarly, the IEP is a written statement that can be used to resolve differences. The parent acts as the owner until the student is 18. The school is required to give written notice to parents when they propose new services or evaluation or when they refuse a change to service or evaluation that is requested by the parents. This is a very important form called prior written notice. It describes the action or actions proposed or refused, an explanation of why they're proposing or refusing, a description of the data used to make this decision. Notice this is not somebody's opinion, but there always has to be data. And again, this is from evaluation, grades, progress reports, and so forth. The prior written notice also has a description of other options considered and reasons why those options were not chosen, and a description of other factors affecting the proposal. Parents have 14 calendar days to respond when they receive a notice, along with the parental consent or an objection form. If parents do not respond in writing, unless it's the first evaluation or IEP, then the school will implement the change without a signature. But IEPs are not written in stone. There will be revisions. Houses age. The needs of a family may change. Sometimes we need to remodel or update. Maybe your house needs new connections for some technology that wasn't available when the house was built, such as high-speed internet or cable television. Sometimes a child leaves home or comes back. Similarly, IEPs will change. Our children become older. Reevaluation will add new information at least every 3 years. Sometimes the child's needs may become less or more significant. Behavior problems may come up. The child may not make expected progress in the general curriculum or on the special education goals. New assistive technology may become available. In these cases, there will be a need to evaluate for current needs and services. The team will need to develop a new or changed IEP. The IEP development process on the earlier slides happens again. Let's go back to the people who are involved. When you're building a house, there are many people involved who do many specialized tasks. It doesn't always go smoothly, or does it ever? Ask anyone who's ever built a house. Yet the people need to work together and resolve differences in order to get this house built properly. I read a description of an architect, and the description included, architects work to bring cost savings and other efficiencies through timing and materials to benefit the homeowner. They're skilled in working with other design-related professionals to get the most value for the project. So too in education. Parents have an important role in keeping things running smoothly. Talk to and listen to your child. How do they think things are going at school? How are his or her grades in regular education classes? What do teachers say at conference time? What can you do to help? Use your skills to assist the contractors or the school personnel. Parents can assist by helping with homework, emphasizing the importance of education, alerting the school to problems or concerns. Say thank you whenever you can. We have a lot more information in a book called Working Together. And again, you might want to request this book for tips on work and helping parents and professionals work together on this very important job. Groups of parents and professionals can work together too. We often see neighborhood associations work together for such things as safety. Neighborhood associations make requests of the local governments. Similarly, schools are required to have special education advisory councils, or SEACs, as a vehicle for parents to give advice to the school districts about special education policy and decisions. There's a lot more information about this on a link on PACER's website. Mechanisms are in place to resolve differences when building a house. Contracts must be followed. The best way is always for the parties to work together informally to resolve the problem. But there are small claims courts and mediation services to help too when necessary. Similarly, the education process has systems in place to resolve differences when the informal means are not successful. For informal means, we always recommend that you talk to the IEP case manager. Part of the job description of this person is the primary contact person for the parent. For example, after an IEP meeting, a parent received a new IEP and several items of discussion were not included. The parent called the case manager, who responded, "Oh yes, I remember that now, and I'll add it. May I fax these new IEP pages to your place of work?" So in other words, this informal means of contacting the IEP case manager took care of this problem. When that doesn't work, there are also formal methods. Expect the district to use the prior written notice form for proposals and refusals. This is once you see it in writing why the district proposed something or refused something, that may solve the problem right there. But there are other formal methods, and I'm going to outline them as on your slide here, but they do not need to be used in this order. Conciliation is unique to Minnesota. It's kind of a higher level IEP meeting, but not necessarily the same IEP team members attend the meeting. Usually there's a higher level district representative such as the special education director. At this meeting, or after this meeting, parents will get a copy of a meeting summary within 5 business days. Mediation is a group process. The mediator is not a decision maker. It's a process that's voluntary and confidential. The written agreement is enforceable, and we have really good success rate in Minnesota. When parents and schools go to mediation, the success rate of resolving difficulties is currently about 90%. Some of the most common issues that are taken to mediation are communication breakdown, distrust, and different perceptions of a student's need. Please note that if you say no to an IEP proposal, it says in that same line that you can request a conciliation or mediation to resolve those differences. So those are two very commonly used meetings in Minnesota. A third type of a way to resolve differences is called a facilitated IEP. In this case, it's the IEP team plus a facilitator who is one of the same people who runs mediations in Minnesota. This is a voluntary process, and you make the request as you do for mediations with the Minnesota Special Education Mediation Service and the school. An example of a time you might use a facilitated IEP is if you've met 3 times and the issues still are not resolved. The parents and the school could agree to invite a facilitator to keep them focused, and the goal of this type of meeting is a signable IEP. Sometimes none of these things work, and parents and schools both have a right to request due process hearings. Parents will need legal advice. Schools always have legal advice, so we recommend that parents would also. When you request a due process hearing, the person who requests it must state the problem and give a proposed solution. There will also be a mediation or a resolution session. At least they must be offered to try to resolve the issue again before going to the due process hearing. The Minnesota Department of Education has a model request form. Another way, but a totally different type of way to resolve differences, is through filing a state complaint. This is an allegation that some state or federal law has not been followed. We recommend that parents say, if instead of just filing a complaint, they might say, I know that I have a right to file a complaint about whatever the issue is, but I'd rather work it out. But sometimes we do need to file complaints, and parents or anyone can file a complaint. When the Minnesota Department of Education investigates, if they find that there has been a violation and harm has been done, the state must see that a remedy is provided by the district or by the state. If you need help, contact us to help you write a complaint, as the requirements have changed. An example of filing a complaint might be that a child's IEP states that the child will have speech therapy 3 times a week, but the speech therapist is on maternity leave and there's no substitute. The principal says there's nothing that they can do about it. The parent files a complaint. The state investigates the complaint and orders the school district to send the child to a clinical therapist at the local hospital until the school can provide the service. That would just be an example of filing a complaint. If you have any more questions about any of these methods, this is a good reason to call Pacer Center and ask for a little bit more information, or discuss your particular situation and which one of these types of meetings might be the one that would resolve your differences most quickly, because the goal is certainly to get things back on track for the child. When a new house is completed and the final inspections are done, the parties meet and sign a closing agreement. Similarly, special education comes to an end also. This may be the result of graduation, of aging out of the system at 21, or happen when reevaluation shows that the student is no longer has special education needs and is therefore no longer eligible. A summary of performance is required when a student leaves special education as the result of graduation or aging out of the system. This summary of performance, or SOP, will give recommendations for the student's futures. There is one new thing. Another way that you can leave special education: parents can now revoke special education consent. In December 2008, the regulations to the federal I.D.E.A, Individuals with Disability Education Act, states that parents can now request to end special education services or revoke consent. The school must do the prior written notice form, and then they are not responsible for a free appropriate public education. If the student does not do well, the parents can request evaluation and this process begins again. PACER advises great caution when considering this option. We recommend that you give us a call before revoking consent for all special education services. In summary, we hope that the analogy of building a house has helped you understand the internal consistency of the special education process. For more information, you can contact PACER Center by calling us or finding us online. While this webinar was going on, we did receive some questions from participants, and I'd like to go over some of those questions now.
Carolyn, when does a prior written notice need to be used?
The prior written notice is a very important form, and it must be used anytime a district proposes or refuses to begin or change the identification, evaluation, or educational placement or the provision of a free appropriate public education or FAPE. So each time a new IEP is sent to parents, the school will also send a prior written notice and a parent consent objection form. If a parent requests an evaluation but the district says no, this is again the case where they should send a prior written notice that will say why they are refusing that request. Another example is if a parent requests more speech therapy and the district says no, again that yes or no should be on a prior written notice form.
Please define what a SEEK is and what a SEEK does.
Yes, that's a good question, and I did just mention it very briefly before. SEAC, S-E-A-C, stands for Special Education Advisory Council. Some SEEKs use different names. But the purpose is for a group of parents of children with disabilities and others to advise the governing board of the school district. This law applies to charter schools and cooperative school districts as well. PACER has a lot of extensive resources available on our website. You can go to PACER's website, and down in the lower right-hand corner you can see minseekinfo.org. If you click on that, there are a lot of extensive resources to help parents and school districts implement effective SEEK committees.
Are there required timelines in the special education process?
Many processes do not have required timelines. In these cases, we try to think of what is quote-unquote reasonable. The Minnesota Department of Education has said that reasonable is often 10 school days. So in other words, if you write a request to the school or wait for a report or IEP, a reasonable wait is probably 10 school days. Another key is to think of FAPE, a free appropriate public education. Will my child be denied an appropriate education if we have to wait too long? There are several required timelines. One is in regards to evaluation. There are 30 school days between the time the parent signs the permission to do the evaluation and the time that they receive the information in the summary report. A second timeline is that parents have 14 calendar days to consent or object to an IEP. And finally, if a parent requests a conciliation, primarily when you might say no to an IEP and request a conciliation, the school has 10 days to hold that conciliation when it's requested by the parent. If there are other problems about timelines, just give us a call because, as I said earlier, our goal is to help get things back on track for the child as quickly as possible.
Another question is, my child is struggling and needs a paraprofessional to help him. How can I get that service for him?
We really recommend at PACER that you bring the problem to the IEP team, not the solution. Let the team figure out solutions and pick one that will be appropriate to meet the needs of the child, and that may or may not be a paraprofessional. This may require additional evaluation or looking at data the school already has. The team would probably ask questions like this. Why is the child struggling? With what? When? Where? In all school environments, just certain ones? How much? Once this is clear, then the team can brainstorm and figure out a solution, which may or may not be a paraprofessional.
Our next question is, can you give me a little more information on how to request a special education evaluation for my child?
This is a question that we get a lot at PACER Center. Each school district is responsible for something called child find. They must find each child in their district who may have a disability which may require special education services. So if you feel that your child may require special education services, put your request in writing, and you can say something like this. This is a formal request to have my child evaluated for special education services. My child's needs are, and then just list a couple of needs that you think your child has. This can be a very brief letter, and then sign it and let them know what are good places and times to get a hold of you. Send this request to the special education director of your school district and the principal of your child's school. You should expect a reply in a reasonable time, and again, that's probably about 10 days, within 10 days. If the answer is yes, you and the district should schedule a time to meet to develop an evaluation plan, and once you agree in writing to the plan, the school will then evaluate the child. If, when you request an evaluation, the answer is no, they are required to give you a prior written notice form which will tell you why they are saying no and give the data, not opinion, to support that decision. Once you see their reasons in writing, it will help you decide what to do next. If the answer is, we want to do pre-referral interventions first, ask what they have in mind, how long it will take. Then you can decide if you agree with this. If not, they may not delay your request for an evaluation in order to try interventions first. However, sometimes it is a good idea to try the interventions, so keep an open mind. Once parents agree to evaluation, the school has 30 school days to complete the evaluation and give the parents a copy of the final report. Parents have a right to have the results explained to them clearly.
Our next question is, I've requested an evaluation for my child, but the school said they needed to do response to intervention first. What is that and how does it work?
This is related to the above question. Response to intervention, or RTI, as it's sometimes called, is a formal process used by some school districts to see if interventions, such as small groups, different materials, more time, etc., might help a child learn a skill, usually reading. So ask questions such as, how long will this process take? When will the school say the interventions aren't helping enough? What happens if the intervention does help? What help would my child continue to receive? Please note, though, that RTI, response to intervention, may not delay the evaluation if a parent requests evaluation.
Carolyn, our last question is, we are moving to another Minnesota community this summer. What happens to my child's IEP?
The term to remember is transfer student. Your child will be a transfer student to a new Minnesota school district. This also applies when moving into or out of a charter school. Your child will maintain eligibility in the new school district. However, the IEP team will meet to decide if the current IEP is still appropriate in the new setting or if the school will propose some changes. If the new district proposes changes, they must do so in writing for parent consent or objection. When moving to a different state, the new state must serve the child until a new evaluation is done to see if the child continues to be eligible in the new state. That's it for the questions we received, but please feel free to contact PACER directly with additional questions. Thanks for participating or viewing this webinar. Please be sure to give us our feedback on the short evaluation form. We also thank the Minnesota Department of Education for partial funding of this webinar.